Frank, you're on the other side. Morning, everyone. Morning.
Egunon. Sail ofizialeko The Railwayman, un largo viaje filma ikusi berri dugu, orain egingo dugu prentsaurrekoa. Buenos días.
Good morning. We're going to hold a press conference which corresponds to the film of the official section, The Railwayman, Un Largo Viaje in Spanish. And yeah, we've got Jonathan Duplitsky, the scriptwriter, the producer as well, and the widow of the character, Eric Lovox, who the film is based upon. And the first question, there's a question in the first row. Please, a microphone. And I'll take notes, okay? Hi, good morning. I would like to ask you two questions, okay? The first is whether you truly believe that pardon or redemption exists, or forgiveness exists, or there only exists guilt, shame, and wanting of a revenge. And the second question, I imagine you've explained this quite several times now. I don't know, somebody else might ask this or has asked you this already. The references, because there's a lot of David Lynch in the film, I think he said. All right, thank you.
I'll start if that's okay. In answer to the first part of your question, I very much think all those things exist. I think one of the things that made me very interested in this film and in Eric and Patty's story was that it was a story that revealed and looked at the very worst and the very best of human nature, and in a way defined what we are, what humanity is. And I think at very close to the top of that list, one of the great defining things of what makes us human beings, separates us from animals, is our ability to have the emotion of both hatred and revenge, but also find the capacity to love and to find forgiveness in those that perhaps torment us to the extent that Eric was tormented. And I've, to me, looking at it as a huge story or as a huge idea, the idea of forgiveness, particularly in this modern world, is a very important and very interesting thing for me to explore, because I think it is one of those defining emotions or defining elements of humanity. Sorry, yes, go on. The second part about, did anyone else want to say something about that?
I was just going to say that what Jonathan was saying then about the virtue of forgiveness, when I first optioned the book, the overriding themes for me were that, for me, torture was not acceptable under any circumstances. Possibly some people may justify that if it's saving other lives, but I found that this was one of the themes that was very important in the story of Eric. The sublime virtue or the divine virtue of forgiveness is a test for anyone, and throughout the film one feels that Eric can never escape what happened to him, but he's able to do this in a sublime way. So for me, the force of love proves to be far more powerful than the force of hate. And I think this is the lesson that runs through the whole movie.
I mean, just to say it's not a philosophical position. We knew Eric. That's the answer to your question. The answer to your question is Eric Lomax, our friend, and Patty's husband.
The David Lynch.
Lynn. David Lynn.
Oh, yeah, David Lynn.
Go on, you go.
Sorry, David Lynn it was. I'm sorry about that.
Sorry, just what was the question? What was the
David Lean influence?
David Lean influence? Not specifically. Although, I know many of the films of David Lean, but I guess when we first embarked on making this, it felt like a Leanian type of drama, I guess, you know, a great expanse. It covered a great time scale, and it was a great journey. I very much like the Spanish translation of the title of the film, referencing it as a journey, both externally and internally. And I guess that, you know, many of David Lean's films were, you know, epic journeys, and I think particularly this one is an epic journey of one man's internal discovery in a way. So yes, I guess so, but not specifically, yeah, but I guess in spirit.
May I say something, please? Sorry.
No, go
Yeah,
ahead.
go on, please.
I think that it's very good that you can recognise something that has gone before, because it gives people a focus to begin with, and then they see that it is possible to go through the depths of depravity and move forward later. And the essence of the film really is to show that it is possible, no matter what we go through in life, that it is possible to move on later on if you're willing to let the past go. I think, and the other thing is, of course, it shows what happens when somebody comes back from war, be it Second World War or Afghanistan or any of the modern wars, and their battle stress is not treated. It's somewhere that I think my country and also others are probably letting their veterans down very much. If they get a leg blown off, it shows. But if they have seen terrible things which affect their minds later, then they're left on their own, unless it's charity work usually.
Yes, two questions. One for the widow, for Eric's wife. He goes to seek vengeance, but he doesn't fulfill that vengeance because forgiveness comes along, and that's my opinion. Can you correct me, please? Because the truth is, what he wanted to kill his ghosts, and he said that's what he was going to do when he went there. And at the end of the day, it wasn't revenge that he was seeking, but he wanted to, at the end of the day, kill his ghosts that he had in his mind. And for the director, I think it's a bit diluted, a critique which I think should be much stronger of the British government at that time, that practically left to one side or sold, so to speak, those military or all of those soldiers due to a strategic decision. Did you want to go that far? Did you want to address that issue, or you didn't dare go any further as regards to how the British government left those soldiers on their own, basically? I think the first question, yes. Para la segunda parte de la pregunta.
A government thing. I think the surrender was, you know, complicated, but in 1945, the Allies had won the war. Nobody wanted to hear stories about defeat or surrender. Even the men themselves didn't want to tell those stories. They kept their own silence. It wasn't purely a political thing. It was also a personal and a psychological thing, that they didn't want to speak about these things in a country that was drunk on victory. And also, this isn't just a story about the Second World War. It's not even really a story about the Second World War. This is a story about torture, which is a very live issue. When I first began working on this film a long time ago, 15 years ago, it's a largo viaje para mí, aunque. That seemed like a lost world, the world where people tortured each other. But now it's how we do business in the West. We torture people. It's part of our policy to torture people. So it's very much a live issue. It's not an issue about the politics of the Second World War. It's an issue about how we do business now.
Yes, go.
When President Bush was talking about waterboarding, my husband wrote an article for the London Times newspaper describing what it was like. Now, that was relevant a few years ago. It's relevant now just as much as it was in the Second World War. And we need to know about these things. Words don't give you a picture, but when you see something, it helps you to realize. Although I would say that a lot of the horrendous things that happened to my husband have not been expressed in the film, because I was told that nobody would come to see it if they gave a graphic view of the whole thing.
I think the first part of the question was a very important question, because it's true that Eric goes to kill his ghosts, but the realization that he can't kill the whole of the Japanese population is something that dawns on him. He realizes that after killing one, he will have to kill another, he'll have to kill another. So, whilst I think I couldn't personally forgive, he forgives, but he can't ever forget. And I think that's the key message that we've got running through this, that you can't go and kill all of your ghosts in this world, whatever they are. You have to face the ghosts, and you have to deal with them.
And also I think that the ghosts are often emotional and psychological, not, physiological or real, and that somewhere along the line it appears that Eric understood, and Paddy, you correct me if this is not accurate, but almost in a non-literal way, he understood what sort of Bill was outlining, was that he couldn't, that by killing everyone, even if he could kill all the Japanese that he wanted to, that would not bring him peace. And I think that at some point he had a realization, which I think was a process. I don't think forgiveness is something that you just wake up and decide to do. I think it's something that you go through, and many things contribute to it. And he somehow understood through a process that the slaying of his ghosts was not about the murder of other people.
But also, what Eric realizes is that governments make war, and we're all victims. He realizes that Nagase is as much a victim of the war as he was. And with that realization, he finds the ability to forgive.
May I just,
yes, please.
Also, my husband felt very strongly that hatred didn't do any good to anybody. It didn't hurt the person that you were hating, and it only hurt yourself. And the last words of the film, quoted by Colin Firth, "Sometime the hating has to stop." Well, Eric did say that to me when we were in one of the cemeteries in Thailand, and I was wondering whether we were being disloyal to all these young people. And my husband just turned to me and he said, "Sometime the hating has to stop, Paddy."
Nire galdera
My question's for the director. You're in the Folk Readers Project, and the question is as follows. I think in those institutions, and to collaborate with these institutions, do help to heal those injuries, shall we say, and to go ahead.
Yes. I mean, I think, if I understand your question, that healing, as I sort of referred to before, the idea of forgiveness, the idea of healing is not something that that happens overnight. It's a process, and I think the work that often the work that you do with other people, in a way, rediscovering your own humanity, rediscovering the normalcy of your life or yourself as a person who can be open, who can communicate, who can love, who can access those emotions that make all of our daily lives normal is sort of that process towards healing. And I suspect that it's impossible to do it on your own. As Paddy said, you know, too often people come back from seeing terrible things and having terrible things done to them. I think once Eric described to us about how even though no matter how bad the physical things that happen, they often heal very quickly, and you don't actually have that much to show for the damage that's been done, but of course most of the damage is internal, and that is a long journey to find healing and find a way of moving on, and in a sense rediscovering the normalcy of life and being able to lead a life that can access normal emotions and normal interactions with other people. I hope that answers your question.
I was asking her about
Okay.
the Forgiveness project that I think she's involved in, and I would like to know if she thinks being involved in this kind of project is a sort of, it's good for healing the wounds of war, yes.
Yes, I would say that it's very good. It doesn't happen immediately. It takes time, but it is a progression forward.
Eric worked a lot with a woman called Helen Bamber, who runs a thing called the Medical Institute for the Victims of Torture, which mostly deals with refugees now. I think, was Eric the only Second World War person? No, but he was the first.
Second World War
Yeah,
person.
the only, that's...
The people from Iraq and wherever there's torture in the world now.
So that's to deal with people who are tortured now, refugees who come to Britain who've been tortured in Iraq or whatever. And Eric was the only person from the Second World War who went to her. And he gained a lot by helping Helen as well. Not she helped him, but it's a mutual thing. I think when you give, you gain.
Buenos días. Por desgracia.
Good morning. Unfortunately, wars in the world continue to be news. The Railway Man can be qualified perhaps as a peace film. That would be, is that a grain of sand in that favour towards achieving that peace? Would that be your contribution? And Patrick, I would like to know what you felt when you saw that first scene, those first scenes, to see Nicole Kidman playing your role. And or was it truly love at first sight on the train with your husband, or how did that go?
I'll just answer the grain of sand thing. I hope that it is a grain of sand, a contribution in some kind, without being pious about it or whatever. I mean, the first role of the film is to be true to its subject matter and to engage an audience. And but if at the same time it can be, if only a grain of sand as a contribution to the idea of peace, the idea of humanity, then I would be very happy. But I'll let you answer that.
As far as love at first sight is concerned, I wouldn't call it a passionate love. It was more an inner knowledge that this person was going to be someone very important in my life. It was a recognition, if you like. Love came later, and the passion.
Can I answer what she thought about Nicole? Because I remember what she said about Nicole the first time she saw her. I think she said, I was much better dressed than that. She was really cross.
I think Nicole has done a very good job, and I appreciate her. It's an honour.
But she's not as glamorous as you, Patty.
Oh, come on. She's not 76, it helps.
If there's one specific grain of sand, it's that about torture, it's that leaving aside the moral issues, the psychological issues, the information you get from torture is useless. It's always completely compromised because the victim is always going to tell you what you want to hear. He's never going to give you news. So maybe that's a very specific thing. That's in that story, I think, because Eric that radio didn't do what the Japanese thought it would do.
Señora Lomax.
Mrs. Lomax, it's a very pleasure to see you here. I've got questions for the rest, but the truth is I just want to ask you a question, 3 questions. First is whether you identify yourself with the role portrayed by Nicole Kidman. Secondly, do you continue to have contact with the family of Nagase? And thirdly, whether any of the war veterans, colleagues of your husband, have also taken that long journey or similar journey. Has other war veterans, colleagues of your husband, have they wanted to take that journey in order to find, to get rid of their ghosts as well? I hope you remember the 3 questions there. I hope so.
Well, to answer the last one, I can't answer for other people, I'm afraid. I know that just in a very simple way, our doctor, local doctor, told my husband some time after these events that he had patients whom he had not known were veterans of the death railway who were talking to him and asking him for help, psychological help. So I hope that helped. Our doctor felt it gave them permission because Eric was well known to have suffered a lot during the war and so was highly respected from that point of view in the veteran community. The doctor said that he felt that the men were given permission to now talk about themselves a lot more, and presumably they would also, some of them, forgive and not forget. The second question...
Are you still in touch with the Nagase?
Oh, yes. I'm afraid not. Mr. and Mrs. Nagase are both dead. They predeceased my husband, my husband died last October. And their families are Japanese-speaking entirely. Maybe one day, if we get the opportunity to meet, then obviously I would meet them. And Nicole, I was amazed, considering that the film is a drama based on the book, how true Frank and Jonathan have managed to keep to the essence of the story. There's a lot of truth in it. And I was very happy to have Nicole play me.
I'd like to say that when I first optioned this book, I realised after meeting Patty and Eric Lomax that Patty was very modest about her part in this whole situation and played it down quite a bit, but it became apparent to us, to Frank, whilst writing the script, and to Jonathan, that she played an immense part in the rehabilitation and in the recovery of Eric. And she played it down quite a bit, but she was so instrumental in it, and we've tried to portray that in the film.
I mean, I think, you know, the thing that really occurred to us was that this was first and foremost an emotional journey, and it was impossible to tell without Patty's involvement.
Hi, Laszlo Christian, Screen Hub Australia. Your last film, Burning Man, was about a tormented man. This is about a tormented man. Are you a tormented man? What's this fascination with him? And my other question is perhaps to Bill. What was the budget of the film, and was it easy to get the financing once Nicole and Colin was on board? I think, well, the last time we talked at TIFF Toronto, you said it was going to be a $15 million budget. Was it?
Well, shall I jump in first?
Go first, yeah.
Initially, when we did the first script, it was a much bigger budget, and it was much more of a war epic. And I'm very superstitious in the way that things happen. And we would not have, had we been able to raise the money in the first instance, we would not have had the same movie. It would not have been the same film. We had other actors and actresses in mind, and it was more of a focus on a war epic as such. Once we had to get the budget down, it became very apparent to us that we had to cut out much of the big war scenes and focus on the human story. And that's what Frank managed to do, to focus on the story that I believed it really was. And it was only then, with that delay of a number of years, that when we completed the script, my partner, producer on this, Andy Patterson, had made a film with Colin Firth before, which was The Girl with the Pearl Earring, about Vermeer. He gave him the script, and Colin Firth said, I've just got to make this film. I must make this film. And so, yeah, we had the budget down to something like half of what it initially was. The eventual closing budget on this film was around 15 to 16 million, but initially it was more like 40 million. So, but it would have been a different film, and I don't think I, as a producer, would have been as happy as I am now with that first idea of the film. I'm very happy with this now. I feel that when I first read the book, I thought this book needs to be in front of a bigger audience, because the book to me was only a cry in the dark. That's all it was. And if nobody bought the book, then nobody knew the story. And I thought it was essential to try and make this film. I met with Patty and Eric. Without really knowing I was going to do this, I promised her we would make the film, and finally we did. And that's why we're here. It's fantastic.
After thinking about it I don't think I'm a tormented man. But what I would say is that, I think what is wonderful about film as a medium is that you can explore, often in heightened ways and in extreme circumstances, the emotional landscape of characters. That's what we did with Burning Man, and that's what we did with Railway Man. But in many ways, the reaction of both those characters, for me, are very human, natural reactions to the circumstances that they were living through and having to respond to. So that was, and within that comes great opportunities for both drama and, cinematic exploration.
It can often, when you're dealing with a true story, gaining the trust of the real people involved can be a significant problem or effort. And I'm curious as to whether it was a long process to get Eric and his wife to cooperate with you. Were they suspicious at first? And how do you think you did win their trust? And how important were they in and their personal contributions, and I'm sure Mrs. Lomax can answer this too, in sort of getting the film that you wanted to see made to the screen?
Well, on reading the book, I immediately contacted the publisher and set up a meeting to go down to North Berwick and to see Patty and Eric. I don't know, really, only Patty can answer that, what impression I made on that day, but I was quite passionate about my wanting to make this film and optioning in the book. And I hope that they believed in my passion, and I hope that they believed that the film was going to be made. And I left there not really knowing whether they were going to give it to me or not, and there were other people after the rights as well at that time. And when they did come back finally and say, yeah, we want to go with you, it was a great day for me, yeah.
You might have.
Do you want to say something? No. It took a long time to make this film, a really long time. It took, from the first draft to today, it's about 15 years. So we initially bought the rights to a book, but we found that we'd become friends and part of the life of Eric and Patty. And that film has grown out of a relationship. Is that right, Patty, would you say?
Yes, very much.
And we make this film like from the bottom of our hearts. It's not about intellectual rights or winning trust. It's a film that's grown out of a long and true friendship. And it was a tremendous sadness in some ways that Eric died before seeing the film. But in the last year, we've come to realize that the only person on the whole planet who doesn't need to see this film was Eric Lomax, because his great victory was that he could forget about all these things. that these things are not in his mind anymore. And for us, the greatest day, and I kind of almost didn't care what happened after that, was the day that he came to the set. Patty visited the set quite often, and her son was there most days. But Eric was quite frail by the time we finally shot the film. And for us, it had become a point of honor. Bill had promised Eric that we would make this film, and it proved a really difficult thing. And for 15 years, I felt like a bad person because we hadn't quite made the film. So the day Eric came to the film was the vindication. I don't care really what happens after that. He came to the set. It was a really funny thing. Bill and Andy, the producers, scheduled a day of shooting in Berwick, in Eric's town, specifically so he could have a day on the set. And in fact, we shot at the bottom of his street, like 100 yards from his house. And on that morning, he was feeling quite too frail, even to make that little 100-yard trip. So when we broke for lunch, Nicole and Colin had met Eric a lot of times. I don't think he'd met Nicole before. No. They both went to see him over lunchtime and had a cup of tea, and at the end of that, Eric was feeling much better and wanted to go on the set. But by then, the unit had moved to the top of this hill above the harbour, and it was really windy, and it was really steep, and it was really, really difficult. So all the electricians and the carpenters and everybody had to carry Eric in his chair up this hill. It was just like something out of Herzog. It was like out of Fitzgerald. We got him there. And he got up onto set, and it was a very simple setup. It was just Colin looking meaningfully into the distance. But we had a tracking shot, so there was some track laid. And when your heroes behave exactly as you want them to behave, I sat with Eric by the monitor, and I said, "Have you got everything? Do you need to know anything?" And he went, "I'd be very interested to know what gauge these tracks are."
I mean,
it was just a fantastic day.
Yeah, it was a great day, and what was a couple of things that were very memorable for me. I only came onto the film 3 years ago, so I'm like a babe in the woods compared to some of the others. And but the first thing, one of the first things we did was to go up and meet Eric and Patty, and it struck me very quickly just how close a relationship had built up between Andy and Bill and Frank and both Eric and Patty. And it was a fantastic shortcut for me to be able to, in a way, access the trust that had been built up between these people. And I found them both so accessible and so open to any questions and any discussions, and in a way it was like, it was creating a bond and a trust, which had been going on for 12 years. And having access to that was a wonderful thing. And on that day, I also remember it was the most pleasing moment really in the shoot was that we were up on this hill and we were doing these shots pushing in on Colin's face, and there were actually shots of Colin. We didn't know where they were going to go in the movie, I just asked. All I did was get Colin to think about Eric and what he'd gone through, and in a very sort of esoteric way, And I remember Patty turning to me from the monitor and giving me a thumbs up and going, he's captured Eric perfectly. And that's kind of what I was going for as well, was just to get some moments emotionally that I knew Colin could play inside himself that somehow captured this man who was about to forgive someone. And that was, it was a wonderful thing.
Over those 15 years, we lost faith in ourselves quite often, but Eric and Patty never lost faith in us. And isn't that right, Bill? And I think it's because of you that we're here today.
Can I just make a very quick 2 points? One is that our hometown is Berwick upon Tweed, the most northern town in England, and it is a very beautiful place. What was the other one? Came from what you were saying. I'm sorry, I've finished.
Okay, the last question, please.
A question for Patricia. How did Eric, I know Eric was very ill, but how did he feel when he met Colin, for instance, and what did he feel about him playing him?
Well, Eric, to begin with, because he'd been so ill for several years, he had a condition which was related to muscular dystrophy, or the neurological type of diseases, called myasthenia gravis. It's a very slow thing. We didn't go to the films and movies very often, so we were rather out of touch with who were the current stars in moviedom. And it wasn't until Eric saw a picture of Colin and his wife on the front page of his favourite newspaper, the Daily Telegraph in London, that he turned to me and he said, "Oh, we must have got somebody famous here in our film." So that was the initial thing. There was no stars gazing at all. And when he first met Colin, Colin, of course, was very, very much younger, same age as Eric's stepsons. It was very much a matter of, being... it was difficult for Eric to meet new people by then. But to cut a long story short, they became good friends, respected each other, and I think it was quite unique from what I can gather. So he was very pleased.
I know how much it meant to Colin to build that friendship with Eric, not purely as an actor, but as someone he could admire as a human being. And I think, as Frank said, in many ways, the experience of making the film was, quite profound for all of us. And just to be able to have the type of contact and relationship with Eric and Patty, as has been described, was, was an amazing experience.
Okay, thank you very much. Eskerrik asko.
Sure.